I'm so excited to have Austin here with us. How are you doing, Austin?
I'm doing great. How are you, Freda?
I'm doing well, thanks. So, there's so much that I want to talk to you about. Would you like to kind of give a little intro to who you are before we get going?
Sure. Well, as you guys can see, my name's Austin Wyatt. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee area. Turned 30 here in 8 days, so we're counting down to finally getting old. I work as a senior project manager in civil site work construction. That's the boring work part. Beyond that, I'm a huge avid sports fan. I love the outdoors. I like to hunt, fish. Big University of Tennessee and New England Patriots, Red Sox, all of that, which make no sense with each other. Uh, I love to golf. I'm terrible. That's why I've got this wicked red tomato sunburn on me, my cheeks today. Um, that's about everything. That's the interesting parts. We'll dive into the rest. You have to kind of investigate a little bit.
Oh, so I often get referred to as a Protestant on Twitter, and I noticed one of your answers when, for those who don't know, I send out everybody a little questionnaire form so I can make sure that I have like the best interview with them that I can. So I have like the information. So, which is one of the many reasons I'm excited to talk to you. What does being a Protestant mean to you?
So I guess I've grown up in a Baptist church
Mm-hmm.
and I identify primarily with a lot of the central tenets of what a typical Southern Baptist church, or what I know to be typical. I've only ever participated in the activities around two or three churches and primarily spent all of my lifetime with one specific church. Um, to me, I've always thought, I haven't thought of it as much of an identity because it's all I've been familiar with. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, Protestant and Christian, the area I come from, is really synonymous.
That
In
makes
terms of
sense.
like Protestant versus Catholic, I know like you see on social media, there's like this huge conflict between the
Yeah.
two. And even more so if you go back through our church histories. I've never really felt drawn into that conflict, particularly before, on behalf of either side. Never really been offended by the Catholic faith. Never
Mm-hmm.
felt like, I'm not waving like the Protestant badge and like going to battle for it.
Yeah.
It's what I've really known since I've been a part of the faith.
That makes sense. I can see that. Now, how you grew up as a Protestant, right?
Yes,
Well, you
ma'am.
grew up in faith. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so my parents they had us in church. I've got myself and then four younger siblings. We've spent our entire life in church, which I'm really thankful for, and not just in like an attendance sense. We've always been like really intricately involved with always trying to serve, be a part of multiple events as much as we could be,
Yeah.
almost to like a social degree, kind of surround us with that.
That's really beautiful. I love that. Do you have any like favorite earliest memories of growing up in the faith?
I still remember when I got saved, and I was at an incredibly young age, borderline so young, some people would argue with the idea. But because of that really early and constant introduction of faith conversations, I remember getting saved at the age of 6. I was at the Walmart parking lot in Jefferson City, Tennessee. So nothing spectacular about it. Just in the car, riding out to go get some groceries, and I had like a storybook Bible, and had always been
Mhm.
familiarized with the idea of that there's sinfulness in every human, and that Jesus was the path to that, this death and resurrection, and the faith that would save us from sins and redeem us was the only way forward to an eternality with God. My parents were very intentional to introduce me to the idea of like, we know you're young, but this is a really short, quick. It's a temporary life, and
Mhm.
they've got this forever waiting for you. And that was from the time I could talk. I was hearing those things. My other really kind of cute story, I don't remember this, but my mom and dad remind me constantly. My very first word was amen. And what I would
Oh.
do is I would go up to my little baby gate from the time I could crawl up and grab hold of it. I had related the concept of hearing prayer over lunch and dinner. I remembered amen. So when I
Mhm.
got hungry, I'd go shake the baby gate and I'm like, amen, amen, amen. And that meant it's time to eat.
Oh, that is so cute. I love that.
And my mom has always loved that story.
Understandably, if I was like, if that happened to me, I'd definitely be telling it all the time. It's so precious. Now, what convinced you as you grew up in your faith and grew in your faith that your religious beliefs were the truth?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So, when you grew up in your faith and as you grew up in your faith,
Mhm.
what convinced you that your religious beliefs were the truth?
So it's always been I have felt like I had a really good foundation,
Mhm.
and just as you grow to learn and read more. I remember at the age of 8, I got my first full copy of the Bible, like well, not necessarily in a storybook version, but just, the entire thing front to back. And I always love to read. So I just went like head over heels for it. I mean, I immersed myself in it as much as I could. I think before I was 8.5, I'd read through the entire book probably 10 times, and
That's
just like a
amazing.
lot of memory retention. And I never felt, and I consider myself fortunate for this, I never felt
Mhm.
that foundation rattle at all. It just, as it grew, it was just more and more to pile on top, and it
Mhm.
never became hard to add to. It was just, you get more information. And so nothing that I've ever, I guess I'm lucky to say I've never gotten to a point in time where I felt like I had learned enough that I
Mhm.
started questioning what I knew. And I think
That
I
makes
have to
sense.
credit a lot of that comes from really good teachers and
Yeah.
having been surrounded by trusted authorities who wouldn't introduce these concepts of, trying to encourage intentional doubt or making you want to question things that don't necessarily need to be questioned. There's foundational truths that we don't need to try to undermine to make sure we know them. It's kind of my own personal
Yeah.
experience, but
That makes a lot of sense, though. I can really see that. Having good teachers is so important. And I think one of the things that's kind of been helpful for me in my walk this far has been having really good friends that aren't afraid to teach me things, that aren't afraid to be like, okay, like that's great that you understand it this way, but you're missing a couple words here.
oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
really do it what oh gosh. Sorry, my like entire desk just moved. Sorry, my cat's a thick boy.
See, that's what I was going to ask. Was it a cat? We've got three, and I'm waiting on one to jump up here. We're on the table where their food and water is. So I'm waiting on somebody to pounce in and get in the middle of the episode.
Yeah, that's why I always have this chair back here because if he comes in, he's like, "What are you doing? You're not paying attention to me." I'm like,
He's
"Well,
got to
just
be a
sit
part of
there."
it.
He's very much a drama queen. Now, what are some of the theological beliefs that give you hope, or like a specific one?
Um, I would say probably first and foremost, like theological belief that gets debated back and forth is an opposition to the idea of predestination, strictly in the sense that there's this pool of people who are in, and then everybody else, sorry, like better luck next time or no luck anytime. I've never been willing to latch on to the idea that every person here is everything is already that the dust is settled. There's nothing that
Mhm.
can be changed because I find that to be incredibly discouraging against what I want to be in this life is to be
Yeah,
known as like go tell Jesus to everybody and anyone who's willing to listen. Integrate it into any possible conversation, any little way in they give you. And if they don't give you a way in, go around and check the back. See if you can like find another way. Just loop that in. And I feel like I'm dragging my feet, wasting my time. If that conversation can't make a difference, then what am I doing here? And
absolutely.
if the Great Commission is about being a witness, I need to be able to know and believe that those conversations have to matter. And for that, I have to believe that all men and women can be redeemed through faith, the same as I can.
That is so true, and that's so beautiful. And it's also one of the things that has kind of been a topic of conversation amongst my friends this week with my core friend group because I'm trying to find the words without spilling the tea.
Sure, yeah, no, it can be a difficult subject to approach if there's disagreement in it because it's a
Yeah.
fervent argument for sure.
I've had some Calvinists kind of wonder why I was having you on the show.
Uh oh.
And
So
I'm like,
they could already tell, huh?
yeah. There was definitely some resistance there. And then I was like, I don't entirely get the whole Calvinist thing. And so thankfully, I have one of my best friends. She's going to be on the show next week, who I kind of like call up and I'm like, hey, girl, I don't get this. What's going on? And she's like, okay, it's like this. And I'm like, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And she's like, exactly. It helps that her parents are Bible translators and that that they were also missionaries growing up. So
Awesome.
yeah, she's really awesome. Um,
That part has been confusing to me though. The idea to try to understand the other side of that argument. I, I can't come up with a justification for why someone would want to believe that. I don't,
yeah.
unless the only thing I've ever gathered from it, and it's not to be overtly critical, especially like anybody who was, emotional enough about it to bring it up and ask the question with you. But I've never understood why someone wanted to be made to feel that special. The specialness is in, being rescued, being forgiven. And that is just as special for me as it is for every other person. that ever experiences that salvation. I don't want for that to have been something that was ordained to me that didn't take any part of my own participation. I'm
Yeah.
glad that I can't earn it. I'm glad that it can't just be mine. It's something I can do. But I also want for it to matter that it happened to me.
Absolutely, because I kind of feel like, no, I'm coming into all of this as an itty bitty baby Christian. That's why my show's named what it's named. And that's one of the things to me that it's like, okay, but I want to dedicate myself to God. I want to have that free will to be like, God, I love you. Like, please make me one of your people. And to do, the important work to understand what I'm kind of stepping into in this chapter of my life. And some other views of like predestination and such are very fatalistic and that and all of that. So that's why
Yeah, it represents more splendor to me for the entire narrative of Scripture and of just the Lord being worthy of being glorified and being praised, that He could bring us something that we have to willingly go after, and that we would still want that to understand it and to desire and seek after that with our life is much better than just here is who my people are. These are going to follow me because it has been made so. It's more
absolutely.
beautiful if it's a choice. The most beautiful parts of human love, when you boil it down, like, a father should love his son, a mother should love
Mhm.
her daughter, a husband should love his wife, but it's still a choice. Because you see countless examples where people fail to make that choice.
Absolutely. As a married woman myself, I mean, yes, we're in the married woman club. You're a married woman too. No, but as a married individual myself, it's definitely a choice that you have to kind of wake up every morning and make and consistently dedicate yourself to both God and to your spouse.
Absolutely. How many years for you all?
It will be 9 this September.
Awesome. You got to see your head by a year. We've got 8 years, August 1st.
Oh, that's exciting. Awesome. Yeah. Um, I'm looking forward to introducing you to. I think you'd hit it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do the same with my wife. I'm sure she'd love to.
Yes, I would love to. Now, speaking of family, could you share with us a little bit about the story of your saintly ancestor and how their legacies influenced your faith?
Sure, absolutely. So it started with my dad having always talked about, he did this really extensive family tree project in high
Mhm,
school. I think it was like junior and senior years. I think he did it on his own. It wasn't necessarily a school project, it's just something he did with school resources.
mhm.
So he had his great grandparents, all four were alive at that point in time. Well, it's not four, that's eight. Sorry. He had all of his I got totally messed up on my math there. That's my bad. I
No
haven't
worries.
counted
Math
those in
is
a while.
hard.
But he had all of his great grandparents when he was growing up at high school age. So there's a lot of history there. Particularly, he grew up in West Virginia, a pretty remote area, close to Snowshoe Mountain, but it wasn't anything like it is now back then. But so it was sort of an oral tradition. Like people were really good about keeping their histories. He had some writers
Mhm.
in the family too that kept track of that sort of thing. So he did this project where he tracked the ancestry all the way back to English nobility. Really, really extensive research, just
Mhm.
using documents and stories that the families had, and then going through like different encyclopedias, historical sources. And so, like I said, it took him like almost 2 years to
Yeah,
do this. So we took a trip up there, and I found some of the documentation that he had put together, and it was only bits and pieces. At that point, it only went back to like the early or mid 1800s, like Civil War
mhm.
type era, I think, just before the war broke out. So that kind of motivated me after seeing all that. I was like, well, there's all these resources available now. There's all these online databases where
Mhm.
people have compiled these stories. I'll look into this. It's just a random February day of sitting at home, really rainy, so there's no work going on, just
Yeah.
killing time. I started diving into some ancestral research, and I finally had made a leap because one of the most difficult times in my experience to
Mhm.
navigate through is the early 1800s and the late 1700s. Just like once your family had come to the U.S., they
Mhm.
had done it seemed like they did a worse job of keeping up with family lineage than
Yeah.
their European counterparts, and they had
Yeah.
really, really good record keeping over there, at least ancestrally. I've managed to bridge that gap. And once I got to the 1700s, it took off like lightning. Like we went
That's
back across the
awesome.
pond into England, and from there you really quickly go all the way up to people like William the Conqueror, and farther down that line, some
Mhm.
famous figures, Henry Wyatt, who was involved in the court of King Henry VIII. You know,
Okay.
as far he was involved with like the War of the Roses and things of that nature. And then Sir Thomas Wyatt, who was a poet, he's believed to have worked with William Shakespeare for quite a while. He's got a lot of written pieces. And then Sir Thomas Wyatt II, I sent you some links about him. He's
Yeah.
the one that famously led the Wyatt's rebellion against the Queen. Didn't work out so well in the end. But so
um,
as far as the saintly process up, so the furthest I got up to where I found a ancestral figure marrying someone named Wyatt was Saint Adela of Normandy, who was one of the daughters of King William the Conqueror, who was originally from Normandy, France, and came over and ended up conquering England. So his daughter, her second marriage after the loss of her first husband, was to a man named Admiral Adam de Wyatt of Normandy, and he was the admiral of basically the entire fleet for
mhm.
that military group that came over and ended up conquering England. And so he was a Wyatt, and then we're straight down father to son Wyatt lineage from there on out. And that was in, I should know the years. I should have written this down. I forgot my notes. But you're
It's all
talking
good.
about like 1100s
Mhm.
AD all the way down to me here in like 1993. It was really cool to track that down. So what was really encouraging to me, most people are going to latch on to the idea of, oh, I have a king. Like, this
Mhm.
guy was an English ruler way up my family tree. And like that's what they center on. For me,
Yeah.
it was really cool to find out that about his daughter having been a saint, particularly what she was known for was a patron saint of stewardship. And so like when most of the kings and princes of that time went off to go fight in the First Crusade, she
Mhm.
sort of was given the keys to the kingdom. She ran almost everything in a government sense. And she also spent considerable resources throughout her life endowing abbeys and churches, educational centers, and was known for bringing educational resources and spiritual resources, which obviously is all going to be
Yeah.
Christianity at that point in time, merging those two together into schools of academic and religious thought.
That's
And
amazing.
I thought that was really inspiring because what I've known of my family through my great grandparents down to me has been a unrelenting passion for not only being involved in religious and academic studies,
Mhm.
but to helping to endow that those centers and circles would take place, in a financial
Yeah.
sense, just in a like showing up and physically serving and always being a contributing member.
Mhm.
It was really neat to find out that that's a family legacy.
That's really beautiful. And in chat, my dear friend Nancy wanted us to know that it was Christmas Day, 1066. William the Conqueror is crowned King of England, the only medieval historical fact she knows. It was after he won the Battle of Hastings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool just in terms of finding out obviously about a king like William to go that far back into history.
Yeah,
And that's 1,000 years ago, and to be able to trace a line through there.
absolutely. I can only trace mine back to the Mayflower.
I mean, that's a pretty good ways back.
um, on my grandmother's side and then on my grandfather's side, we can trace it through. So there's this thing called Castle Island,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you probably know a little bit about as a New England sports fan, but it's basically like Boston's Ellis Island.
Mhm.
And so we can like trace our lineage back to coming through that port when my grandfather's parents immigrated from Ireland.
Oh, that's awesome. So was there a significant name change coming over from Ireland? Did they anglicize the name pretty quick?
Not necessarily. It was the funny thing is that my name's pretty Irish, but it gets more Irish when I got married because then it was like super duper. All of like it fell in like perfect line where like everything was super Irish.
Nice.
Yeah, it's redacted, but I'll tell you what it is later.
I got you. Can't give away too much information, right?
Exactly. um, so, have there been any particular moments or events in your life that deepened your faith or caused you to have a stronger understanding of your beliefs?
I've been particularly moved, uh, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, by seeing immediate fruits from witnessing. Yeah, most of my life growing up through, like, I guess high school was sort of middle school, you'll talk to people, but high
Mhm.
school age is where you really start to grasp the idea of, like, I'm willing to go share and tell people about this. And of course, as you
Mhm.
move into college, it's something that you discuss, it gets debated. And,
Mhm.
everybody wants to either be like, I agree, or I want to be a part of the arguments there. And so I've always held the idea that those conversations would be a part of someone's journey,
Mhm.
but never really seen the process play out until the last few years. And there were a few reasons for that. One was strictly just the frequency. And I got to
Yeah.
a point more recently, a few years out of college, getting into a career where I realized that it didn't really ever upset people to present them
Mhm.
with that idea. And part of it is probably, my peers along with me were all getting older. And so there's
Mhm.
like probably a greater willingness to hear opposing ideas and not just immediately turn argumentative. As you're
Yeah.
growing up learning, when you got information coming in, you hear anything that's counter narrative and you're armed up. You're like, nope, I'm ready for that. That's not it. And here's why. And then nobody
Yeah.
can convince you otherwise. But it was heavily reinforced my faith to see, you know, especially in this past year, going
Mhm.
through the winter time and spring, a lot of people that I went and just had direct, outright conversations with, whether they started that way or whether
Mhm.
it's like you became friends for a few minutes or you've known them for several days or weeks or months. I
Mhm.
got to see several people want to walk into faith immediately while we're there together. And that was hugely encouraging
Yeah.
because that's when you finally feel like you see the fruits of discipleship.
Mhm. That's really awesome. That one of my good friends had a similar experience because for my birthday a little while ago, she gave me my first non-cult Bible.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've heard you reference that a little bit through some of the podcasts I've listened to.
Yeah. And so my husband and I have actually started reading it every single day off that he's had. And we told her about this, and she just like was crying happy tears for like the longest. So she's actually here. So thank you so much, Marissa, for that, for blessing me that way. And it's been really great. So it's been great for both of us.
Yeah, it's always nice to see where you have that impact where someone immediately turns and says, "Hey, like I want to pray about this now," or like I want you to tell me everything about this, what this means now, versus having to come back to it. And they both can be really encouraging. You have the occasional person that will come to you years later and say,
Mhm.
"Hey, I don't know if you remember this, but when we talked, that mattered." There's something about that day of though; it more closely resembles the stories that you get to read about in Scripture. And so it helps feel like that you have a willingness to be on the best path.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do, it wasn't just a matter of my audience being more willing to listen. A lot of it was on me, which was just to completely set aside a fear of being told no.
Mhm.
There comes a point where you realize rejection doesn't matter. This person says no. All right, fine. On to the next one. Don't lose any sleep over it. Doesn't bother me. And I hope they'll come back and ask later. But
Yeah.
nothing I can do about that.
I think that the whole shaking the dust off your feet is a really important lesson where we are. I mean, I know there's a little bit of discussion on Twitter today about where exactly we were, but we are where we are in the grand scheme of things. And we don't necessarily have time to trying to kind of like beat it at horses or where just it's not going anywhere. Let's like move on and shake the dust off our feet and try to talk to somebody that whose heart is open and willing to listen.
Yeah. And the other thing too about
Mhm.
just being willing to talk to having that encounter with anybody versus for a long time I waited until I felt like somebody checked the boxes and it's like, okay, they want me to bring this up versus just bring it up to anybody that would have a prolonged conversation. The more people you talk to, you start to realize there's way less people than you have in your head that are just going to get wildly offended and try to run you
Yeah.
off and run away from the conversation. Most people will at least listen, if not show interest and ask a lot of questions. And that would be kind of the bare minimum. The more people I talk to, you have so many more positive experiences that
Mhm.
you start to lose sight of the negative ones that you were always afraid of that very rarely came to fruition.
That's really cool. Now, some of these questions are actually some of the ones that my friends have submitted. They were like, "Hey, you're having him on your show. Ask him this for me." I'm like, "Okay, I will."
Oh boy.
um, how would you describe your personal relationship with God, and how's it evolved over the years?
So currently, I would describe it as I have a sense of constantly being connected.
Mhm.
I don't remember the last time I felt like I needed to go to a spot where I could go be with God. I kind of grown into the feeling that that was something that's always accessible and that we, in being in communion with one another, that we share these moments and experiences together. And there's always that counselor, a trusted teacher there to lean on, and through prayer and just a sense of, living joyfully, not never facing discouragement. That brings a lot of it brings a huge peace. It's kind of overwhelming to think that I'm not alone in these situations, that I'm walking with the Holy Spirit in me, going through all of these things. So I'd say very open, very constant, very active. I still take time to set aside like specific going to prayer. It's not, I don't just think it's like a constant open mic where, he just understands these things. He still things I strictly want to ask for. But primarily, I feel like constantly walking through life, not on my own, if that makes sense.
It does. That's really beautiful. And the chat was saying that as well. Some comments were like, this is what God wants. And then my friend Marissa asked a question, kind of going back to a few moments ago. What do you say when you witness to people and share the gospel?
A lot of it's really different. So I try to get first involved. I've always been really open about telling people what I'm about. And so once I open up to them that way, they start to tell me their own story, their experiences, what they do for a career. And so it's very different for each person. It kind of gives me an angle. I know a lot of people popularly say, and so with respect to what I'm going to say, I don't really disagree, that you need to have a long-term relationship with a person to effectively witness. But I agree with that in a sense. But what I feel like is you just need to know how a person feels about themselves, how they feel about their own experiences, and they will show you, it's like the guy on the airstrip with the light. They will show you where you can come land and, how to most effectively reach people. So I try to personalize it, but it always is trying to come from a place of positivity and encouragement and just lightening burdens, because that's, when Jesus was approaching people, a lot of teachings and different areas he went and witnessed to for the very first time, a lot of it was about overcoming burdens, about lightening a yoke, about having a sense of relief and peace, and that all of that could be found in faith and following through him. So I try to find through people's personal experiences, what would that relief look like with their story and what they're going through.
That's really awesome. That really is, and that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the comments was with my friend Nancy, let them know you are truly interested in who they are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. More often than not, I will find out really quickly if somebody wants to talk, because I kind of give them probably an offhand indicator. Like if I start talking to this guy, I might be stuck here for a while, because I will go and talk as long as they want to.
But that's one of the things that I appreciate about you, honestly.
No, it really
hard
helps.
to talk to.
I noticed it was easier in the Northeast. I took some trips up there this spring. People would indicate to you, a lot of people, there's this sort of stereotype in the Southeast. People are friendlier down here. What friendlier really means is someone disinterested will sit there and listen to you talk and get aggravated and aggravated and aggravated, and they won't walk away. Versus, if you go somewhere like what people say, oh, in the Northeast, they're short to the point, they're kind of rude. I'm like, no, I prefer that. You tell me right away, I'm like, hey, how's it going? They're like, no, okay, that's fine. I know where you stand. You don't want to talk. And then someone who goes ahead and engages, hey, Annabelle, someone who engages, a little intruder there. Someone who engages, I know they're willing to sit down and have a conversation. They give me that indication really quick. And I have a lot of respect for that. I don't want to spend 25 minutes boring someone that's like, I can't believe he hasn't shut up yet. I just want to leave.
Yeah, New Englanders don't have a filter. We really don't.
I end up feeling a lot worse when I find out that I was bothering somebody that just wanted to walk off.
Right? I'm like, tell it to me straight. Like, just if you don't like me, if you don't like what we're talking about, like, tell me,
Yeah, you're not gonna hurt my feelings. It's okay.
Exactly. Now, sorry, there's so many questions. Are there any specific individuals or spiritual mentors who have played a significant role in your faith journey, and how have they influenced your understanding of God and your relationship with him?
I'd have to start definitely and say yes with my parents. My parents were extremely intentional about surrounding us with spiritual influences. They played that role themselves, but they also made sure that they wouldn't be the only ones. They wanted to be certain that we would be surrounded by trusted teachers. I'm sorry, I've got this cat coming in on the
No
side. She needs some
worries.
attention. They want to be sure that we be surrounded by people that were entrusted to teach and to help us
Mhm,
learn, both from an authority sense with older adults, and then also they wanted to be sure that we were surrounded by peers who
mhm,
shared those same sentiments, or at least were in an environment where it would be out of line to show something different. So I think that was nice. Beyond them, I very, very heavily influenced by my senior pastor growing up, Richard Emmert. He was a huge mentor to my father. My grandfather on my dad's side, he passed when my dad was 26, I think. So
mhm.
very, very young. And he was
Yeah.
very fortunate. Our senior pastor, when they moved here from Virginia, took him under his wing and just always been a huge influence in his life. And by virtue of that, he was always very involved with me. And
Mhm,
I'm very, very grateful for that. And then my youth pastor that took up most of my time through middle school and high school,
mhm.
Brian Smith. He's a New Hampshire native now. He moved up
Oh,
there,
cool.
I think, about 7 or 8 years ago. That way down in Tennessee most of his life, so took a
Mhm,
big move there. But Brian was extremely significant in my life. And what he really brought to the table was encouragement, friendliness, and boldness. I feel like I adopted a lot of my personality about being willing to witness came
mhm.
straight from Brian. He was, I don't want to hear any excuses. Like, be happy, be positive, be uplifting to people, and you
Mhm.
better go tell them the truth. And I don't want to hear anything else. So that rubbed off on me quite a bit. Um,
Very Bill Belichick, do your job.
exactly. Yeah. Do your job. Yeah. It wasn't treated as like, I'm glad you're doing this. That's so great to hear. It was like, you better be doing this because I know you know well enough to do it.
Yeah, that's
It's
really
been,
awesome.
I've been hugely blessed too with my wife, Summer. She was raised in a family. Her grandfather was a pastor, and her whole family has been intricately involved in church growing up. I was very, very lucky to meet and fall in love with a woman that wanted to walk in lockstep in a faith journey through marriage and just life in general. We were really close friends.
Mhm.
We called ourselves best of friends for 3 years before we even considered the idea of dating. It was really nice to know that I'd fallen for someone who they held those same values, that wanted to see that passed down through generation to generation, the same way that my family and her family had instilled that in us.
Yeah. I mean, kind of opening the conversation up a little bit, which, by the way, I've seen your wife on your profile picture and she is gorgeous, like
Thank you.
absolutely beautiful.
I will have to
And
pass that along.
you should.
I tell her every day, but it helps to hear it from more than one source.
Yes, I've noticed that myself as a woman. Um, and so what there's a lot of people I've noticed who are kind of in our age bracket who aren't settled down yet.
Mhm.
They're understandably frustrated. What would be some of the, since you are a happily married man, what is some of the dating advice or kind of some of the green flags about a person that you'd suggest other people look for?
I think you definitely want to look for similar beliefs. People that I know that are married and have been for a long time, that I see some of the biggest struggles in is they compromised on something really important because
Mhm,
they liked all the little stuff. And a lot of that had to do with appearance and emotion and just attraction at first. And that's
mhm,
fine, but that wears off in a hurry. It, if you have opposing views, it's always going to turn into a mess. So, and not in the sense that you don't have to agree about everything, but I
mhm.
would definitely encourage people, particularly if they're in our sort of age group, if you're still looking for somebody right now, you're at a point where you're not changing your mind. Most likely, you know who and where you are and what you want in this life. You need to find someone who's agreeable to that. It doesn't mean that every conversation, every thought process is not as robotic as the people who are critical of that mentality thing. A lot of
Yeah,
people say, like, opposites attract, and that can happen on like a personality sense. But it's much more beneficial to have that unification. You don't need to be going north while he's going south. It's just not going to work. Um,
exactly.
Beyond that, I would say, and this is probably most important in an
Mhm.
age where so much inappropriate behavior is not only tolerated but sort of encouraged in the dating
Yeah.
world, is to be looking for the right thing. I have people I hear talking about all the time. I want to find a wife,
Mhm,
and they go, it's not even to say that you can't meet a wife in like a very social atmosphere, like where something to do with dancing or drinking.
mhm.
It's just really popular. Most people encounter each other at bars, but
Yeah,
there's a difference between meeting someone socially versus going to look for them in a place where what you're really looking for is someone to take home for the night. And I think a
yeah,
lot of people confuse that. they spend their time running around looking for, just the whole hot single scene where
Mhm.
everything is a mess, and where most people show up with the understanding that they're looking for an experience, not a relationship.
Yeah,
And you can't, the
exactly.
two don't really merge. You're not just going to hit lightning in a bottle. You're not going to be that one lucky guy or girl like, well, I found the
Yeah,
one other person in here that wants a long term relationship. You need to go look for those things where they can be found.
that's really sound advice. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Certainly.
I used to call myself a hopeless romantic, but then I met my husband and we got married, and now I'm a hopeful romantic. So,
There
if
you
you
go.
don't mind sharing, how did you meet your wife?
So we met the first day of freshman orientation at Carson University. That's a small Christian school just east of Knoxville. It's like 10 minutes from where I grew up, so kind of in my backyard.
Mhm.
We met that first day. We didn't just meet each other. So I had a guys group, some people I grew up with because I'm local to the area, also
Mhm.
went to the same school.
Oh, cool.
And we went to a trip. Have you heard of Dollywood before?
Yeah,
Over in
I've been there
Gatlinburg
before.
area? Oh, there you go.
I actually
So
got my first kiss there.
oh, awesome. So your romantic situation developed, somewhat similar to mine. So
Yeah.
I had a group of guys to run around with because, we just come out of high school. So you go to
Mhm.
Dollywood's orientation, it's like guys are going to run around and the girls are going to run around. So this group that we hung out with, and we met this group of girls
Mhm.
like going around different rides and roller coasters that they actually remember exactly where we were. It was where they do the shoot, what do they call little cars? Like the bumper cars, bumper cars.
Yeah, bumper
Yeah.
cars.
We were waiting in line up for bumper cars, and this group of girls comes up behind us, and they've all got the little lanyard for orientation. And we just sparked up a conversation, and it ended with us inviting them to come to my lake house. And my dad said he'd take us out on the lake. We go tubing, wakeboard, ride around, hang out, swim, whatever. And so we just, we have 8 guys and like these 10 girls want to come hang out. It's first day orientation. We're like, all right, we're doing it. This is college. We're doing it the right way. We're all meeting
That's
girls.
awesome.
So my wife was part of that group. I
Mhm.
actually ended up for a time in freshman year, I dated a different girl that I met in that group, and my wife and I at the time we became really close friends and sort of stayed that way for a while. Um, that was all freshman year. We were pretty close. Sophomore
Mhm.
year, fall semester, she went on a trip with the Disney College program down to
Oh,
Orlando,
cool.
Florida. Yeah, I don't know if you're into Disney, but she grew up obsessed with Disney back when they
Yeah.
were what they used to be and they're supposed to be. All the
Yes.
great cartoons and everything. But so she went down there, came back spring semester, and unfortunately encountered me dating another girl for a month, and that was a total mess. Didn't need to be. Broke that off. And then going into that summertime, we hung out a lot together. My family would go down to Charleston to like deep sea fishing trips for marlin, sailfish, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And that was the first time that early summer I asked her out. She was like, "No, no, no, I don't know. Like, not sure it's a good idea." I kept asking, kept asking, kept asking. And we finally rolled around to the fall. In October, she finally agreed to go out with me. And I think it was probably within 3 weeks. We were. It sparked really well. We felt really comfortable because, like, at this point, we've known each other for a good long time.
Yeah.
And within a month, it's I love yous. By the next summer, we got engaged, and a year later, we got married, and just been going on ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that, even I mean, at least personally for me, when my husband and I were friends first, it feel like you build a really solid foundation of like that friendship and then kind of carry that over into marriage.
Oh, absolutely. You had a really reliable expectation, understanding of who they were. Someone
Exactly.
doesn't necessarily have they don't have a reason or an incentive to hide anything from you if they don't think it has long term consequences. So you get a really good
Exactly.
idea of what that person is. And particularly for me,
Mhm.
it wasn't so much about avoiding negatives. What I was able to see in her, because she wasn't trying to show me all these positive characteristics of herself,
Mhm.
like because she wasn't trying to get my attention that way. I just
Yeah.
saw them anyway. They were intrinsic characteristics of who she was, and that was what I fell in love with. I'm like, this meets every expectation, exceeds it. This is what I want. This would be a great wife. She'll be a great mother. We already know each other really well. Why on earth am I trying to go chase after any other women?
Yeah. That's really awesome. I'm really glad you guys found each other.
Yeah, we got very lucky.
Yeah. Now, kind of switching gears here,
Mhm.
do you feel like outside of God blessing you with an absolutely gorgeous and very sweet wife, do you feel like He blessed you with any other spiritual gifts?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, we talked about the witnessing thing. I've
Mhm,
got a huge willingness to do that, and a lot of people don't. I mean, and it's not age dependent. It's not lifestyle dependent. A lot of people they just hit a wall when it comes to that point. So I would say certainly the willingness of like being able to share a testimony, answer people's questions, have hard conversations. So I don't know exactly what you would call that, but just the spiritual gift of discipling or witnessing.
mhm,
Um, I try to do my best to be like spiritually encouraging.
mhm.
I always just in a complimentary sense, just physical appearance, personality. Always trying to find what people value about themselves and sort of try to amplify that. And I want people to feel good about who they are because it's just such a negative world. There's so
Yeah,
many influences
absolutely.
coming in from. It's not just like the third party outward influences. Most people, a lot of friendships, they try to climb up this proverbial social ladder by dunking on top of each other all the time. It's not
Yeah,
helpful or useful. Yeah, and I won't say that I have never been a part of that, but I try to actively strive not to do so. Um,
exactly. I feel that. It can sometimes be very much like lobsters in a bucket.
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like we got to climb on top or try to go below, I guess, with lobsters, make sure I'm not the one that gets picked.
Yeah.
I've also always had a big heart for teaching. Um, I like to help with Bible studies. I teach senior high school boys. I've done several different years at my church. Uh, Always try to host like different camp groups and stuff. Um, One thing that I do encounter with teaching though that's kind of aggravating. I've always wanted to know what people want to learn.
Mhm.
So I've had people like kind of just blindly come in before and ask me like, "Hey, you should teach a study." And I'm like, "Okay, what do you guys want to learn about?" Because I don't
Yeah.
know what you don't know. But I really do enjoy teaching and sharing. But I like to get questions. That's why I love the interview setup. It's like you were asking me questions, so I have something
Mhm.
to talk about. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
kind of like stumble around in the dark. I don't know what people want to hear.
Same. I can definitely relate to that, which I'm grateful that my friend Sarah and chat will be listening. We'll be doing the interviewing for me next week, actually.
Oh,
I'm gonna,
nice.
yeah,
Yeah, do a
she's gonna be,
little
but
role reversal there.
yeah. Now, I mean, obviously, you and I are both fans of Conspiracy Filled. And there was some really cool, interesting stuff that you talked about on there that some of my friends wanted to hear more about.
Sure.
So, would you say that among those spiritual gifts is the gift of prophecy?
It depends on how you define the word. I want to say yes and I want to say no.
Mhm,
Like prophecy in the sense that I think people should write down what I say and study it. I would say no because there's just as much information that's probably not useful as there is.
mhm,
But definitely in terms of having borne witness to and seeing things before they happen. So I know that's happened to me throughout life, and it's something my wife can attest to. Several of my friends, I see things in dreams, which some of them end up, I guess you would call them visions. Dreams work for me. I don't
mhm,
get fancy about the terminology, but seeing several events in my life multiple times, or at least a time or two before they
mhm.
happen. And it's not necessarily always impactful, but it just gives you a sort of preparedness.
Yeah.
But I certainly do feel, I don't feel like I would say I am prophetic, but I would say that a lot of it comes from an intense scriptural study where
Mhm,
you don't lack the confidence to say, "Yeah, this is what the Bible speaks of. I am observing these things happening, and here's what
mhm.
it says about how we're supposed to handle those events." Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Because my husband asked me after your episode, he's like, "Wait, is he a prophet?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I
I
texted
have to
my
leave that
friend.
up for people to study and figure out 1,000 years from now, right? Assuming we make it that long.
Oh, now,
Now, if you were, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt. If you're
go
referring to
for it.
specifically as far as like the dream that I described
Mhm,
about, like the revelation event, which I have seen multiple times and interpreted as the breaking of one of the revelation seals, that I certainly believe wholeheartedly is an event that will come to pass, and I will observe it as I observe it in that dream. Now, I could be totally wrong about that, but
mhm,
every dream that I've had that many times over, and that can be one of the scary things because there's been other dreams that come from that place,
mhm.
all of them happen in a physical sense, not just an event, but they always happen the way I've seen them. So
Yeah.
hopefully that one will wait a little while.
For those, would you be kind of willing to speak more about that?
About that one specifically,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've had a dream before that just what, as far as what I've read and interpreted, believed to be the breaking of the sixth seal of Revelation,
Mhm.
where uh, I better open it because I don't want to get any of it wrong, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I can actually also pull it up on here.
The dream I can see as vividly as day if I just close my eyes, but I don't ever want to describe something that, because somebody's going to jump on me
Can you give
rightfully
me
for that immediately.
can you give me where about that is in Revelation?
Revelation 6 starts at verse 12.
Okay, thank you. Let me just share the screen real quick. For okay.
So I can read from mine if you want.
Yeah.
I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and great men, and the commanders, and the rich and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath is come, and who is able to stand? That's where that chapter wraps up there. So, I mean, just if you want to get into specific terms in that dream, I
Mhm.
observed I think I described it, and it's very consistent. It's a purple sort of meteorite. I was on a beach area, and it goes very quickly from like trending towards sunset, the sun's still up, and then that just immediately ceases, light goes away, up in the sky with a lot of friends and family members in my dream, and it's the same every time. But got a purple meteorite sort of figure, giant comet type structure up in the air, and I
Mhm.
interpret that as the stars falling. Several pieces that came down and hit the earth, and when they struck the waters in the earth, all the waters, the oceans that we were standing by, just receded. I mean, you're talking about like you go from ocean to these giant cavernous, just openness. It looks
Mhm.
like you've opened tenfold the Grand Canyon in every direction, and there was this huge overwhelming sense of fear. We were surrounded by people. It's a beach type area. There's people all over just running around in just absolute fear. And one of the central themes I remember of the dream is the people I was with, we weren't fearful because we understood in that moment, this is what's
Mhm.
going on. And we saw people, they were climbing down into the caves. They were running too high beneath any sort of structure they could cling to just for fear of what's going to come next.
Yeah.
And then it's like the sky rolling apart. I remember just seeing like in the places where the sky had fallen, it looked as if you literally could just take pieces of it and like you folded it apart. You could see that layers of it had just been unraveled and
Mhm.
torn asunder, and they looked like they could never be reassembled again.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think I've had that dream now probably 8 times to date. It's just something I'll see every couple months. It's pretty wild.
Just because I'm nosy, which is halfway the reason why I have a show.
That's why
Just
you do it.
that's why I do it. That and making cool friends like you. Um,
Thank you.
how did that feel waking up after the first time you had that dream?
The first
Like,
time I woke up absolutely drenched in sweat, terrified because I thought it just happened. The first time I have a lot of dreams that are very vivid, even in
mhm,
a physical sense. So one of the worst ones I have to give as an example
mhm,
is I had a dream one time where my brother and I were fighting. My brother Bennett. I'm
mhm.
gonna have to show him this. He'll get a kick out of it. In my dream, he landed a low blow, and I was like pretty pissed off about it. So I
Understandably.
remember in my dream, I grab his shirt and I punch him in the face because we'd just been kind of wrestling around at that point.
Mhm,
Well, physically, while I was sleeping, I was laying sideways and I
mhm.
accidentally grabbed Summer and I punched in the direction towards her face, and I think I kind of caught her a little bit. And she woke up. She's like, "What on earth are you doing? What's going on?" I'm like, and that one didn't end very well. I woke up. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I was fighting Bennett in my dream." She's like, "No, you just punched me in the face."
Oh,
I hope you
can
have not
relate.
suffered. I hope you haven't suffered a similar fate. I
My
guess
hus-
now I could think of it as payback for getting like the blankets ripped off of me or getting kicked in the legs so many
yeah.
times.
This is my side, and this is also my side, and oh, over there, that's the cat side.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah, my
just beyond that
husband's.
one. Oh, go ahead. Go. You're good.
My husband's a very hot sleeper, and he's
Oh yeah,
also has some of those similar tendencies. So I've tried to he'll fall asleep on the couch, and I'll try to take his glasses off and get him all set up so he's comfortable enough if he won't wake up. Which is
yeah.
how many times are you supposed to go wake up when he's just
Oh no, I'm the exact same way. My wife talks about that all the time. That if I pass out on the couch, there's no turning back. That's where I'm going to be until I wake up. She's like, you
yeah.
literally cannot. You can't shout me awake. It's not possible.
Yeah, so I was getting his stuff taken care of because of that. And so I took off his glasses and he was like, somebody's stealing my glasses. And he tried to bop me one because he thought I was stealing his
Oh my
glasses.
gosh.
But I dodged and thankfully he woke up. And
Well,
he's
there
like,
you go.
oh, what happened? I'm
No,
like,
but
go
so
to bed.
in that sense, not necessarily with punching someone physically, but
Mhm,
a lot of my dreams, the mental reality takes on a physical sense while you're in that dream. I
mhm.
struggle in that moment to distinguish between when I wake up, I'm shocked to be in the room I'm in because I think I was exactly where I was just dreaming. They're
Yeah,
not all like that. Some of them, it's pretty obvious, to a clownish sense, okay, this can't be real. This is definitely a dream. So the only thing that becomes comfortable is,
mhm,
the fifth, sixth time you have that same dream. It's oh, we're watching this movie again, but still knowing, as far as I'm concerned,
mhm.
we're going to see this one day. Just all right, what am I going to watch this time? Waiting to see if there's something I missed.
Yeah. And Nancy in the comments points out that dreams are one way God still uses to communicate with us.
I
And
certainly agree with that. I
yeah.
think it's insanely arrogant. I know a lot of different people would disagree, but I think it's insanely arrogant for us to pretend that there's no type of revelation going on with people anymore.
Absolutely.
The hubris involved in the proclamation that all of this happened. We've got our Bible here, and they
Mhm.
wrote this book, and then the book was shut, and nothing else has ever been shown. Nothing else needs to be said.
Yeah.
I think when there are people that follow Christ that give out nuggets of truth every day that
Mhm.
matter to someone, they're impactful. And maybe they're not important enough to be put in a scriptural text, but they can still have a scriptural impact on someone's life. When
Absolutely.
God's people share God's truth, that is something to be encouraged and praised. Is something that God shows. We certainly know not to attribute or claim that it just came directly from us.
Absolutely. Very, very true. Um, John in the comments shares that that happens to him a lot. And I also have another friend who has some similar experiences. And she wanted me to ask you, how could someone exercise these abilities if they know that they have them, but they don't have a lot of experience or confidence?
So it's not something that ever happens on purpose. It's
Hmm.
very random. There's no pattern to it. I would say if you want to try to apply a spiritual and scriptural interpretation to events that you witness through dreams,
Hmm.
the first and foremost thing is you need to be intimately familiar with the contents of your Bible. So you need to know, and it's part of it for me is having read that passage and just the whole book so many times. When I saw that in a dream and I woke up and I'm like, that's somewhere in Revelation. I didn't know exactly where. I had to
Yeah.
wake up and I'm like, Revelation 6, that's where it was. But I woke up
Mhm.
and I'm like, this is something that I have read about and thought about and observed within the Bible before.
Mhm.
So a good understanding is there. And then, kind of something that like a catch-all, a little bit of accountability is
Mhm.
if your dreams are pushing beyond something that's outside of what God has expressed to us that He will allow to happen.
Mhm.
I would encourage people not to feel doomed to. "Oh, I've seen this. It's going to be part of our existence." That makes sense.
That does make sense.
If you ever want to apply a spiritual interpretation of a dream,
Mhm.
you need to be very, very close in a spiritual and scriptural sense to know that there's any meaningful message in it. Yeah.
That
It's,
makes
it's not
sense.
something you just grab out of thin air. We know of one of the most famous prophets
Mhm.
because of his interpretation of dreams is Daniel.
Yeah.
And what's the first things we learn about Daniel is Daniel's really close with God. Daniel
Mhm.
studies the scripture. Daniel observes commandments above and beyond what is expected even of a young Jewish man of that time or
Mhm.
really any point in time. And I think it's very important that that context is given. Daniel
Yeah.
is not some guy where it's like, hey, these guys, these kings, they have these dreams, and here's this guy Daniel, and he just sees them. He's already intimately familiar with what God is and with
Mhm.
what He expects and wants of people in order to see and understand those things.
Absolutely. That's I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this afterwards. And she's going to go, that's such a great piece of advice. So thank you for that.
I hope so.
So John says, my dreams are never spiritual, just random glimpses into the future.
Okay, so I have a lot of those too. That's cool to hear, John. I'm glad I'm not the only one. I have a lot of dreams, and they normally will happen when I'm in big groups of people. And I think
Mhm.
part of that is like surrounded by like 15 to 20 really close friends. Part of that is I think there's so much enjoyment in it. I've always harbored a belief that your spirit sort of it has a I don't know the right way to describe it except to say that your spirit understands eternality, and
Mhm.
so time seems more flat. It's just it's a linear thing, but it's all within the same structure. Versus while
Mhm.
you're experiencing it, you're at one point on the line moving across time and you experience that one sliver. And so I see a lot of events where I will be proactively living it. And then I'll
Mhm.
recall, hey, I've dreamed being here before. And it's this really comfortable feeling. Those I enjoy because they're always very positive. Like,
Mhm.
my most recent one I think was at a someone's birthday party. Like we're up at my parents' pool house, and there's a big group of us up there. And I just remember looking around, and I snapped back to this dream. Like I had a dream about us doing this, and it's an overwhelming, peaceful, like a graceful feeling. John, I hope yours are very similar.
One of my friend, well, one of my mutuals, I guess, on Twitter kind of came into my DMs, and because their question was, they felt a bit more confidential about it, so I'm not going to say who it was,
Oh,
but
totally cool.
they asked, how do you know if what you're experiencing is from God or if it's from more of a nefarious place? Because they've had some previous struggles with some, kind of fighting some demons, because we are still waging a spiritual battle,
Sure.
even, here in 2023.
Yeah. So I'll say first, I've definitely had some dreams where I woke up very confident and shaken. This had nothing to do with anything but pure evil, which is sort of frightening. I don't
Mhm.
know if that's maybe one of the areas where, in spite of being, a born again, forgiven Christian, where like the enemy can still mess with us to some degree, like just to affect and influence thoughts.
Mhm.
I guess I have to assume if we can be tempted, that maybe our thought process can be shaken with while we're in a deep sleep and dreams. If you don't mind me going extremely
No, go for
graphic
it.
for a minute, it's not absurd, but I remember most recently having a dream probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I
Mhm.
walk into a 7-Eleven gas station, going to go
Mhm.
inside and grab a soda, and I'm coming to the checkout register. Two men walk inside. They start screaming at me and just everybody, like just violent screaming. There's no reason
Mhm.
for it, just like yelling, like writhing, agonizing pain. And then they stick their hands out and they reach into each other's chest and pull their hearts out. And then the hearts catch on fire. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. And it's sort
Yeah.
of like that Indiana Jones, like a Temple of Doom thing where he grabs
Okay, yeah,
the heart.
yeah.
And it looked like that. And I'm like, okay, at best, this is like just a really evil, vivid vision that I don't need to see for any
Mhm.
reason whatsoever. Like, just want to blot that out of mind. It's disturbing. It's a weird thing to see in your sleep.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is not part of that movie. This is me walking into a gas station, and it's kind of frightening to see.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I understand it from somewhat of a different perspective,
mhm.
because I this week has been kind of rough, because for the very first time ever, I experienced sleep paralysis.
Oh gosh.
And
Oh, hey,
it was
Linus.
like, hey girl, you cutie pie.
Say hey.
And hi,
Sorry.
no worries. I'm glad to get to meet her or him.
That's Linus.
Okay.
That's my best friend right there.
Aw. I think Jazz was somewhere around here. But it was the scariest thing like ever. I like woke up not being able to breathe. I could feel something like sitting on my chest. My windpipe hurt for like 48 hours after. It was,
Jeez.
yeah. And my husband had like left me in that dream because of the fact, for somebody that didn't like, for some random celebrity,
Huh.
because she was skinny and not Christian. And I was like, wait, what? Like none of it made sense, but it felt so real.
Yeah.
And yeah. But the next day, my husband and I started praying together for the first time and reading the Bible together for the first time. So
So there's some positivity in that either way, right?
yeah. But I can kind of get how like scary realistic dreams are.
Oh, absolutely. I've
Yeah.
never dealt with any kind of like sleep paralysis before, but I've certainly like wake up pretty frequently, like shaking, like hot or cold, covered in
Mhm.
sweat, and just overall kind of like rattled. Like
Yeah.
definitely like fight or flight mode, even though I just woke up. It's just a weird feeling. It's hard to go back to sleep.
Yeah, it definitely was. I ended up waking up one of my best friends when Kyle was just like dead to the world. I and the worst part is she's in Texas, so because of that, I woke her up an hour earlier than the incredibly early time I woke up, and she was
Uh-oh.
there for me, and I was just
How
like,
early in the
okay,
morning?
like 6 a.m.
I gotcha. So
Wait,
when I
privately
have
from
really
her.
bad dreams, I wake up between like 2 and 3 in the morning,
Mhm.
which is absolutely terrible because I cannot go back to sleep. It does not happen. I'm just going to be up at that point.
Yeah, I tried to like go back to sleep, and then I ended up having the same dream, but like a different variation of it where I didn't feel like
I
something was
hate when
sitting on
that
my chest.
happens.
And then I woke up for the day, and my cat was like freaked out because like it looked like he had seen some stuff.
Yeah, more often than not, if I'm gonna that feeling of sleep, like you hit pause because you
Mhm.
woke up and you go back to sleep. It's like, oh, round two. It's almost
Yeah,
always bad dreams. Maybe like 5 or 6 times I've had a great dream. I'm like, dang it, I woke up. And you go
yeah,
back to sleep. It's like, oh, we get to do it again.
yeah. That's so true. For some reason, it's always the bad dreams.
Yeah. But
Um,
I think, like to
mhm,
conclude, talking about how you would interpret whether or not there was any kind of spiritual meaning
mhm,
or just any kind of meaning at all to a dream, would be to examine whether or not they're biblically relevant. Sorry, there went my words. If there's nothing, no kind of spiritual concept or truth to be
mhm,
found within them, then I would say that they're probably just a dream. But I would say there certainly are times where you envision something that has a message that can be important for your life or for other people. It's something to at least examine. Like take the events of it, take what you learn from it, and then
mhm.
go try to examine it within your Bible and see what you find out. Certainly don't just dismiss them. I would encourage people not to just dismiss dreams. Some of them are wacky, some of them are crazy. They should just be thrown away.
Yeah,
But if you examine them in the same lens, you would say, okay, nothing here, throw it away. It's worth paying attention to at the minimum.
I think so too. That makes sense. Now, has your gift ever led you to make significant life decisions or take specific actions? And if so, could you share an example of how that's kind of influenced your path?
Not in a spiritual sense for my first answer, but
Mhm,
definitely the dream that I described when I was talking with PJ and Abby on Conspiracy Pill
mhm.
about being on a sinking boat. Having seen that a few times before, when I saw that had happened, I went and gathered up all my stuff and told everybody, "Hey, guys, the boat's sinking," and I didn't lose anything. Everybody else was running around like, "We can salvage this thing," and I'm like, "No, we're going to sink." So everyone else lost tens of thousands of dollars worth of tangible, like personal property,
Mhm.
versus me is like I didn't have that much stuff on there, but I grabbed it all and got it off. And so,
Yeah.
just in like a physical realist sense, that way for sure. Um, I would say probably not dreams in a prophetic sense
Mhm,
have changed the way I would act spiritually. But I feel like I've seen dreams before that serve as a warning.
mhm,
Dreams where I would see myself in a certain situation get out of control or
mhm.
like, temperamental explosions serve as like, I don't want to be that. And
Yeah.
it kind of like sets a boundary where like, I need to make sure I have learned to stay within that and because don't want to get to that point. See, in the dream, you're only in that moment. You don't know how you got there. So
Yeah.
it's like serves as a cautionary tale. Certainly, I've seen many things that have taught me to be careful to avoid this situation, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. Now, sorry, I'm trying to wrap up with
No, you're
every,
good. You're good.
everybody asked me like a bunch of questions, and they were like, ask him this, and they're like,
We
I'm
can
so
do we can
excited
do
to
a
have him
rapid fire
on.
if you want. I don't mind at all.
What advice would you give to individuals who may be seeking a deeper connection with God or exploring their own spiritual gifts and callings?
I would say if you want to figure out what your spiritual gifts are, just like again, study scripture. I mean, it's going to be the answer to both those questions. Honestly, be studying and try to find things in your life that you either are doing or you can do differently to emulate what those characteristics are. Be like these people that we were left stories to study.
Mhm. Do you have a favorite Bible character?
Uh, my absolute favorite. I'm really huge on Moses and Isaiah. I feel like Moses would be incredible to meet or to
Hmm.
just bear witness to what Moses saw,
Hmm.
because Moses had so much physical interaction with God. When I
Yeah.
read through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, I actually find myself like aggravated pretty frequently, because I'm sitting here now thinking, how could you have been a part of seeing him lead you through these things and have any doubt whatsoever? It
Yeah.
makes it sort of incredible that what's contained within a book now, people seem to act more faithfully on than they did when they were actually physically seeing these things. I don't know how you could have ever borne witness to those things and then decided to put your faith in, any kind of idol worship. Makes no sense to me. And then
Absolutely.
Isaiah I love because Isaiah has so many prophecies specific to Jesus, but he also has some. For me, I'm a huge student of history, and a
Hmm.
lot of what Isaiah prophesied about, you can go and examine non-biblical historical canons in different contexts, and you can see those events taking place.
Hmm.
And a lot of them are really, they're kind of inexplicable for the day. There's like what we would call climate change. There's all these
Hmm.
different famines and significant weather events, all these different warring groups that sort of pop up out of nowhere at random. And
Yeah.
Isaiah was being shown those things through God. I love that you can take him and study history, because I'm fanatical about that.
Yeah. I think my husband's really going to enjoy when we get to that book because he's a massive history buff.
Yeah, if there's one book I would tell people, if you want, like, you like old history, any kind of ancient world history, take Isaiah and history books and go match everything up. It's really fun.
That's awesome. Are there any misconceptions or misunderstandings about the gift of prophecy within the Protestant community that you would like to address?
I don't know about any specific to the Protestant community. I would always caution people to be really careful about what they want to believe in terms of
Mhm.
prophecy. So I would never tell someone like, "Hey, I've seen this, so you need to change the way you're living because
Mhm.
of what I saw in a dream." And the lens I always start with to examine any biblical or spiritual criticism, I want to go take a theme that someone presents and go
Mhm.
straight to the four gospels and go find, is this something Jesus taught directly? Because if it is and I can line it up, then I know we're on the right track. If it's not, then I'm skeptical from the get go, which I think is a really, really good measurement.
Mhm.
Because I'm a firm believer that when he taught here Jesus' ministry, he didn't leave us with a lot of blank spaces.
Yeah.
I frequently hear people talk about gray areas. I don't think Jesus left a lot of gray areas. If you
Yeah.
actually pay attention to the way he taught,
Mhm.
everything is very black and white. There's
Mhm.
not a lot of, he left us to figure this part out. Everything is supposed to come from a place of obedience to God's law. It's supposed to come from a place of love, a
Mhm.
place of care. If you don't have that, you're on. You're in the right spot. You're wrong spot. Sorry.
One of the questions in the chat is because which actually is a pretty solid question. I was wondering this myself. In the English Standard Version, in Genesis,
Hmm.
I forget exactly where it is, but it's Genesis 3. So Cain gets like kicked out of the area after he murders Abel and goes off to the land of Nod. And then the next sentence, without introducing any new characters, goes, Cain knew his wife. So the question in chat goes, how did Cain find his wife?
Let me go look real quick. I want to read that. If I can just look over really fast.
Yeah.
Now, normally, like that phrase, as far as in the ESV that I'm familiar with, when they say "new," would just mean that they. I
Yeah.
think it would strictly refer to reproduction, as far as I can remember. Let's see. You said it was in. Oh, here we go. Chapter 4. Then Cain went out of the land. See, I read New American Standard. It says verse 17. Cain had relations with his wife. She conceived and gave birth to Enoch. When
Hey,
I think
David.
normally when I see the word, I think in the sense new
Hmm.
is just strictly about reproduction.
But how did he like find her? If hold on. Sorry, I'm gonna mute myself.
Oh, you're good.
I think the question was kind of more like, do you want to say hi? Sorry. I'm
Oh,
getting
you're
a
good.
little unhinged. Um, so in the English Standard Version, it goes, Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled
Mhm.
in the land of Nod east of Eden. Then Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. So I get what new means in that area, but
Uh-huh.
where did like Cain's wife come from?
I
When
would say I would operate that they were already together.
okay,
Because if you go look at a lot of the other
hmm
different discrepancy like or descriptions from of that type of passage,
hmm
we don't really get any kind of description of a relationship beginning or end. It's just that they already were. So I would think
okay,
they just relocated together.
okay, that makes sense because we were trying to like look through the characters that were like mentioned in the English Standard
Mhm.
Version, and we had like Adam, we had Eve, we had Cain, Abel, and the serpent, and we were like,
Yeah, I think it's very very implied because I think if you look at I don't recall the
mhm,
exact dates, but if you look at time frames where they line up the different births and
mhm.
deaths of the original patriarch characters in Genesis, this would have been a pretty good while after they were just born. Like I don't this didn't
Okay,
happen when they were like teenagers. They were
okay,
pretty
that
well
makes
advanced in
sense.
life in that point.
Okay. Because we're kind of starting from Genesis and moving, like, starting from the beginning of the book
Oh, nice.
and reading it together. So he asks me questions sometimes, and I'm like, I don't
That would be a
know.
really fun study. There's just so much history there to look at. It'd be
Yeah.
really enjoyable.
So thank you for answering that question.
Oh, totally. I don't know if I'm on point, but that would be the way I would interpret that.
That makes sense. Now, what are, sorry.
They're good.
Now, you mentioned about how some of the denominations can kind of be hard for a lot of reasons. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of talk about in that area?
Which denominations? Was that one of the like survey questions?
Yeah.
So I find it discouraging. I guess I would say
Mhm,
that you've got so many different types of churches. So like I live in East Tennessee.
mhm.
There's probably 9 or 10 different denominational churches where all of the members could walk into a room together and discuss salvation. They could discuss Christ, most
Mhm,
of the meaningful parts of their faith. They could all
mhm.
share a space together, but there's no
Yeah.
willingness to do that. There's these identity characteristics, and I think that's part of the overall deception of humanity
Mhm,
throughout our overall existence has been like, oh, there's something a little bit different about you and about her. Like you
mhm.
can't coexist. You got to go find people that are just like you. It's sort of like tribalist, and that it
Yeah.
doesn't. Anybody that is a like-minded redeemed believer in Christ, there should be
Mhm.
unification of that. And even in strictly just, you could start with like a social reconstruction
Mhm.
that you used to have when my parents and my grandparents were growing up around these areas. People didn't hesitate to have these giant gatherings of like religious groups because
Yeah.
these guys are Lutherans, they're Baptist, they're Methodist. They would just come together and have these big communities, these big picnics, these big activity groups, and that's
Mhm.
better for everybody. I
Yeah.
don't think in a world where there's so many factions that are, no matter what they believe, their one
Mhm.
unifying aspect is that they all oppose Christianity.
Yeah.
Christians need to find ways, avenues to be unified with each other. If
Absolutely.
you and I had a disagreement over something small, should never prevent us having a conversation. Should not prevent us from coming together. Should not prevent us from being friends. We should find common ground and say, we're unified in this. We've been saved by Jesus, and we are both redeemed by His love and His grace and forgiveness. And whatever all the rest of the arguments are based on human interpretations. Who are
Yeah.
we to claim to be powerful and interpretive enough to say that I'm right and she's wrong over something like that when we're both only where we're at because He saved us? We can find unification in that, put the rest of it aside, and be much more powerful as a
Mhm.
group because it brings more of us to the table.
That's so true. I've noticed when we were kind of looking into different denominations and trying to figure out where we fell, if we fell within certain parameters, I guess, that a lot of the, mainline Christianity all kind of boil down into these are the salvational beliefs, and every one of them pretty much has very similar, if not the exact same, salvational
Mhm.
beliefs. And that was one of the things where we're like, what kind of church should we go to? Because I mean, New England, there's not a ton of them, but they're mostly
Mhm.
like random Catholic ones.
Sure.
And that's definitely something that we did notice.
Yeah. Which I mean, I should say, coming on like as a someone who's identified as Protestant, I don't have any
Mhm.
issue with Catholic Mass or Catholic Church presentations at all. The only part of the Catholic faith that I have a
Mhm.
huge question with is the idea of needing someone at a priestly level to intercede with me to God. Because I've always firmly
Yeah.
believed that Jesus intercedes for us, and I don't need anything beyond that. In the same token, I don't want anyone to misunderstand. I have huge respect for someone that becomes a father of a Catholic church. I have a
Mhm.
lot of respect for that, someone who would dedicate their lives to that ministry. I treat that with the same amount of respect as I would any other sort of minister, and even maybe a little bit more in the sense that I know there's a lot of rigorous requirements and things that they have to have proven about themselves, and certain parts of their lives they have to
Mhm.
dedicate and set apart to take on that role. So I don't have any disagreement that primarily that I know of with mainstream Catholicism, except for the idea that I don't need to have confession with another man. Now, I don't discourage the idea of confessing sins to one another. I think that can be a
Mhm.
useful exercise. I think it's a huge part of accountability is not just if you know I'm doing something wrong for you to let me know, but my having a willingness to admit this was wrong and I want people to know I'm not doing it and repenting of it. And I
Absolutely.
think I think all Christians can be qualified to play that role with each other.
I think so too. And I think that, well, so I don't know how much of my like little faith journey that you know about, but I was baptized twice in the Catholic Church. And my first priest in this country was up for, I don't know how to say this, so Catholics in the chat, if there's like a proper phrase to use, I'm not trying to show any disrespect and I love you all. But he was basically up for Pope election and he almost became the Pope.
Oh wow. I don't
Yeah,
know the proper term for that either.
I don't know either.
I feel like I should, but it's up there somewhere. I'll probably find it as soon as we hang up.
I think our Pope election understands it, like explains it better than like, oh, red smoke days. But yeah, religious vocabulary is something I struggle with as well as like religious history. But yeah, so when I kind of came out of the cult that I was in with Jehovah's Witnesses, it was important to me to really focus on what does the Bible say and just kind of take it from there
Mhm.
versus
You said that was
going,
that Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
yeah.
I got you. So I'm not super familiar. I know that people properly describe it as like a works-based religion.
Mhm.
What are some specific parts of that that you were now would be like a red flag kind of held up to?
So I think there's a lot of that. One of the first ones is that the Bible that they use is a corrupt version of the Bible.
Okay.
So some of the most foundational Christian beliefs have been altered due to the way it's been worded in the Bible
Mm,
and like their New World Translation. Um, some of them, like one of the things is that just purely from like a psychological aspect, is
mm.
the love bombing that happens the moment you step into a kingdom hall. They just like, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but pretty much everybody's just like, hi, 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 like very Stepfordy about things.
Oh, I
It's
gotcha.
very disconcerting.
Yeah.
um, there's a couple of things, but those are kind of some of the original red flags that you'll notice before you kind of follow the bunny trail down to,
Yeah. That
yeah,
just in itself sounds like a nightmare. So you're talking about getting bombarded by what I would call passerby conversations, which I hate.
yeah,
I don't want somebody to just say, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, glad you're here." Like if you, I want to tell them, ask me what I'm doing, ask me what I'm about, and because I'm going to definitely do the same thing to you if you'll stick
yeah.
around long enough to listen.
And then there was a lot of emotional manipulation due to the fact that I'm an orphan. So it was pretty much like, oh, if you don't do all of these works and you don't keep growing in all of these works, then when Armageddon happens, you and your mom's resurrected, we're gonna have to tell her, oh, Frida didn't make it, she wasn't good enough.
Good grief,
Yeah.
that
So
doesn't
that's
necessarily seem helpful or useful.
exactly. So that's like a whole other thing. And also the very much like marketing of one of their most popular books is What Does the Bible Really Teach? It's the little yellow one with like the Bible open. Um And so they go up and they like show these pictures and they're like, which one sounds most appealing to you? And I know because I've done that presentation back when I was brainwashed. But anyways, and
I don't like the emotional manipulation pathway at all. I don't think I've
yeah.
seen a lot of that. Definitely not like I wouldn't say within my own church, but I get aggravated. You go like camp atmospheres and stuff. Where you
Mm,
get multiple groups coming together. Drives me crazy when someone brings together, especially kids, and it's like, we know you think you're saved, but do you know that you know that you know? And I'm like, why are you doing this? What do you want them
yeah.
to like question this for? Don't try to tell people that like we know you think you did this, but you probably didn't. So you should say you did tonight so that we can say we got this many numbers and like this many people got baptized. Like,
Yeah.
no, you teach these kids like foundational reinforcing truth so they can keep building that faith stronger versus trying to say, well, you might not have. I don't like that kind of undermining of people's belief and faith at all.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why I got baptized so early as I did, because they're kind of known along with I forget which other group of like either Christianity, like Jehovah's Witnesses, or like actual Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
that's known for not baptizing babies, but baptizing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I was baptized when I was 9.
Okay.
And because I got to the point where like I was kind of this many like levels up and then I couldn't do anything, and I am a relatively ambitious person. So it was just like, oh, okay, so I can do this one thing like once a month and I can do this other thing like twice a
So
year.
is it an actual like tiered like ranking type system?
If you ask anybody who's left and fully recognizes it, yes.
Mm-hmm. Huh.
If you ask somebody inside of it, no.
Yeah.
So there's like unbaptized publisher, which basically means if I'm speaking to you about Jehovah, that I get to write down like, oh, I spoke to Austin for 15 minutes at the end of the month, however
So
many
you like
times.
you literally do like you make a record of like
Yeah,
what you've done that's supposed to be attributable to building towards your worthiness.
yeah.
Hmm.
Like I gave this many people this many magazines and all of that stuff, and it's very
Yeah.
like, yeah. And
Gold
then
star oriented.
exactly. And your ability to like succeed on those levels influences how well, like, if you can actually move up to different like special privileges.
Hmm.
And if you can like serve at the world headquarters, or if you're good enough to write for the magazine, which I actually wrote for the Awake once. And yeah, so there's just uh, feel free to ask me like literally any question because I'll just be open and honest and tell you what's what.
It would almost like a meet in the middle of what I grew up around, not in terms of like leadership people, people
Mhm,
that were intimately involved, but some kind of meet in the middle between your average churchgoer
mhm.
versus like what you're describing. What I've seen is like that at
Yeah.
least there's some aspiration of trying to
Mhm,
reach out and witness. Because that's one of my biggest difficulties within modern church structures I've been around is everybody goes to church Sunday and
mhm,
Wednesday, but I don't really ever see or hear, don't ever hear them talking about reaching out and witnessing to people that weren't
mhm.
involved in that church atmosphere. And I could be wrong. It's just it's a personal observation that leads to a
Yeah.
criticism. But when I am involved in those things, I want to talk about it. If I talk to somebody and get to have a prayerful conversation with them, I want to go share that with other people to encourage them to do the same thing. It's
Yeah.
just something exciting to talk about. It's like your favorite team wins the
Exactly.
ball game. It's like, okay, somebody wanted to know this about Jesus today. That's exciting. You want to share that.
Exactly.
So I struggle with not ever hearing that from people. And then, of
Yeah.
course, if you ever confront that, they'll say, well, you're not supposed to boast. I'm like, no, boast in Christ. That was never discouraged.
Exactly. There's a time, to be quiet, and there's a time to speak. There's a time to be humble, and there's a time to boast in the Lord.
Absolutely.
I know I kind of just like scrapbooked a bunch of scriptures together, but
No, no, there is though, for sure.
yeah.
If we cannot encourage one another in those triumphs, then what do we have to look forward to? I mean, it's a big deal. It's something to celebrate,
Yeah.
something to enjoy. If you believe what we say we believe, you've got to take that as a victory.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so happy that my husband's been praying for us every night before we went to bed this week.
Oh, that's
It's
awesome.
just little victories like that where both of us are, getting closer to Jesus that just make me really happy. So this has been really awesome. I could probably talk your ear off even longer, but does anybody in the chat have any questions for Austin? I know there was some earlier that we. Oh, Goodness gracious. Sorry, I'm seeing some chats here that kind of refine things that we were talking about earlier. Apparently, Pope elections are called papal conclave,
Okay.
which I did not know.
I did
Thank you
not know
so
the
much.
conclave part. I thought papal or papacy, but I didn't know anything beyond that.
Now, I know a very popular question with chat is what is my guest's favorite color? So, what is your favorite color, Austin?
Orange. Orange all the way. Big Tennessee guy. I think I've got that. Got a little wristband here with the checkerboard on it. So just orange through and through. And I know there's like some personality trait things that's supposed to be about orange. Those don't apply. I just love the balls.
um, yeah, Tennessee has some pretty good teams.
We've gotten so recently. We had a little bit of a dark spell there for a while with football, but we're on the way back right now.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's what's going on with the Pats too, where yeah.
I don't know. Don't give it away, but they're going to win the AFC East this year.
I
You
hope
heard
so.
it here first.
Okay. Well, I will let you go spend time with your beautiful wife. I'm going to go spend time with my pretty awesome husband. And I hope everybody in the chat has a wonderful, wonderful evening. Love y'all, and thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.